too cheerful voice. Quite an interesting garden, surrounded by high stone walls, and with plenty of overgrown borders and intriguing nooks. Mary, their youngest, had found a stone bench built right into the hillside and covered in mulchy leaves. Still, it wasn't familiar. It certainly wasn't New York. There was no modern Swedish design climbing equipment, no ice cream and balloon vendors, no towering rocks to scramble on like in Central Park. After 3 minutes, Natalie folded her arms and sat in a plastic chair, their only one, while she glared at Jane, still standing there hopefully by the window. When she'd finally ushered them all back in, it had started to rain. Again. Natalie had turned to her and hissed, "There is nothing to do here." Jane had stayed silent, mainly because she agreed and did not want Natalie to know. Maybe things would be different now, she thought as she reached for another shelf. Today was their first day of school, and surely they'd all feel differently once they made a few friends. Even her. Sighing, Jane eased the next shelf off its braces. This one was slate, and very old. Its heaviness surprised her, and she almost dropped it. When Andrew had bought the former vicarage last spring, Jane hadn't even seen it. He'd raved about all the period details, elaborate cornices and tiled fireplaces, and an ancient aga in the kitchen. Tucked up in the Upper West Side apartment with its double-glazed windows and central air, Jane had been vaguely charmed. "And the pantry has a slate shelf," Andrew had said happily. "You know, a cold shelf to put meat and milk and things on." "Well, I hope we'll have a fridge," Jane had replied with a little laugh. But she, like Andrew, had liked the idea of it. It all sounded very charming, sort of like living in a period drama. Next, she'd be churning butter. The reality, however, was that the house was a mess of peeling paint, warped floorboards, and dodgy electrics. It was freezing even in summer, and the slate shelf she held now was ridiculously heavy. With a sigh, she placed the shelf carefully on the floor. She really didn't feel like picking up a million pieces of shattered slate. And that's when the yellowed piece of paper fluttered off it. It must have been stuck to the back, trapped against the wall, and with a flicker of curiosity, Jane picked it up. It was just a scrap, torn carefully from the corner of a larger sheet, and the writing on it was an elegant, spidery kind of cursive no one seemed to use anymore. Jane squinted to read the few lines. "Beef joint for Weltons, 2 pounds, 2/3 D. Potatoes, 5 pounds, 60 T. 1/4 pound, 40. Mint humbugs for David, 1 D. Jane read it through again, slowly, trying to make sense of it. It was a shopping list, obviously, but she didn't know what the D stood for. And who are the Weltons? And David? She sat back on her heels, intrigued enough for her own homesickness to abate for a moment. She had no idea how old the shopping list was, but by the crackly age of the paper and the spidery writing, she guessed at least 40 or 50 years. And it had been stuck behind that slate shelf the whole time. "I don't suppose anyone wanted to move that heavy thing," Jane murmured. She stood up, wincing at the cramp in her legs. She hadn't even started painting yet, but she felt due a coffee break. She put the kettle on and stared out the kitchen window, the sky heavy and gray.